Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and with the support of Astound Commerce. Modern commerce is complex and leaders need to look beyond web and marketing tech to understand the complete customer experience. The Astound Commerce Maturity Assessment lets you self-evaluate the state of your business against modern commerce demands. Visit astoundcommerce.com/maturity. On this episode, we meet Sarah Jordan, CEO of Mastermind Toys. We talk about her arrival to this innovative retailer in early January 2020, just prior to the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, growth strategies pre- and post-pandemic, and how a skilled team of merchants, marketers, and operators are working hard every day to bring parents coast-to-coast solutions for learning and play. Next, we're off to Chicago for a wide-ranging conversation with one of the most informed and experienced voices in North American e-commerce retail, Jason Goldberg, Chief Commerce Strategy Officer at Publicis and host of the great Jason Scot podcast. We dive deep into the e-commerce platform development world, whether the mobile gap is a feature or bug, and the great acceleration, plus tips for retailers. But first, let's check in with Sarah, live from Toronto. Sarah, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great, thanks, Michael, and thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very excited to chat with you. I know Mastermind myself as a customer. I have a couple of kids, and we were frequent customers. It's such a great story, and you've got such a great story and such an interesting industry. Why don't we start with a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your personal, professional journey and your role at Mastermind Toys.
I am a passionate, energetic, and purpose-driven leader. I've been called a transformer and a change agent, and I deeply appreciate innovation. As for my background, I'm an engineer with an MBA, and I spent the first decade of my career in consulting, specifically at the Boston Consulting Group. And what I was known for there was anything around the customer. So I'm really passionate about the customer, whether it's customer insights, customer segmentation, customer experience. And during my time at BCG, I created a love for large-scale transformation. And I developed my muscle and my passion for being a change agent from the outside. So now, flipping to Mastermind, I'm that change agent from the inside. I've come to take Mastermind on its next leg of growth, and I'm really excited to be accountable for the change. I'm also a lifelong learner, so I'm committed to coaching and developing my people. And I'm also a professor at the Queen's School of Business, and recently was part of the David Sobey School with the RISE program there. So now, today, I'm the CEO of Mastermind Toys, and you know it, but for those who don't know Mastermind, we are Canada's authority on play. We're 69 stores coast to coast and online with our wonder-filled website. We deeply believe that employee experience drives customer experience. And my role here is really to set the medium-term vision and agenda, to build and empower my team, and really to inspire the culture.
Well, you're a real product, so to speak, of Queen's University, both your undergrad engineering and your MBAs from Queen's. And it's an interesting transition, I'm sure you're experiencing, between consulting. Of course, you had a stop along the way in banking, doing omni-channel. But it's such an interesting transition. You must be having a lot of fun going from, the strategic element to the operating element, right? The inventory, the real operating, moving pieces of being a retailer. And you joined at such an interesting time, right? You joined Mastermind, what was it, December or January?
Yeah.
January. So welcome to retail. Here's the global pandemic to deal with. Let's talk about the toy category. It's in the years past, the toy category's had its challenges North American wide. Some tough numbers coming out of the industry in 2019. It wasn't a great year. What are your thoughts coming into it? I mean, the benefit you have that I see, I talk to a lot of executives, is you come to it with very fresh eyes. You've got strategic chops behind you, lots of omni-channel experience, but you come to both the operating role, so to speak, in retail and the category with a fresh set of eyes. What were your thoughts when you got the call to say, let's, go work at Mastermind? And then once you started to get your arms around the business, what were your thoughts about the industry first and then the operations of Mastermind second?
Yeah, well, first around Mastermind, I was attracted to the role because it does have a history as a truly and proudly Canadian retail. It's 36 years old. It was founded in 1984. And there's some elements that are really special about it. I thought of Mastermind before I joined as this iconic Canadian gem of a retailer. And a few things that really drew me to it was the iconic gift wrap. And what that signaled to me was their attention and their focus on being customer obsessed. And so I also knew some fun facts, like they sold the large Hansa giraffe that's in the windows. But I also came to love the fact that Mastermind sells 150 million pieces of Lego every year, which is about 5 bricks for every Canadian. And that leaves 10,000, Michael, to be sucked up by a vacuum. So that's what was pulling me to the opportunity, was that I could see the great foundation. Now, here's what I didn't realize. I wasn't intimately familiar with the toy industry. But as you can appreciate, in the first 6 weeks of my role here, and with the pandemic upon us, what I've realized is that the toy industry is actually having a moment. It is now in the spotlight. So here's my fresh eyes and my fresh take on it. At Mastermind, we don't just sell toys and books and games and puzzles. We deeply believe in play. It is strongly rooted in how we show up every day. And so getting that message out, getting that perspective out, not just for Mastermind, but the toy manufacturers and the toy retailers, that play is kids' work, that play can provide consistency for kids and kids at heart during these uncertain times. We have really tried to lean into that. I wanted to lean into that when I joined Mastermind and to amplify our brand as Canada's authority on play and what play really means. But with the pandemic, there has been an accelerator and a need to talk about this and to help solve parents' problems. So let's talk about that for a second. In the past 6 months, parents have navigated school closures, summer camp cancellations, and certainly a back to school that will look very different. And so this is a moment for the toy industry and the toy retailers to innovate. What does that mean for categories? Well, parents are now turning their backyards into gym class and recess. They're turning their kitchen tables into classrooms. They're turning their basements into playrooms. And so with all of that, we're certainly leaning into which categories are really meaningful. And we're also trying to help our parents, our educators, our caregivers navigate this tricky time. So family bonding has been reignited, and all of a sudden puzzles and games and mashup games are really exciting. And then on the other hand, parents are trying to figure out how to celebrate birthdays. And so they're turning their driveways into birthday parades. And that's reinventing the loot bag. And it's also bringing back the sidewalk chalk. So there's a little bit of a fresh eye perspective on the toy industry, but certainly it's a moment for us to really shift people's perspectives on this isn't just about toys. This is about play, which is deeply important to kids' development, imagination, and education.
Let me take you back to one step. I want to take you back to the before time, as I call it. Before COVID, you had, 6-8 weeks, and I'm sure with your background, with such a strategic bent, you would say, okay, what was your plan with the team as you started to formulate it pre-COVID and the before time? I mean, you probably would have had some sense that something was happening, maybe even from a supply chain perspective in Jan-Feb, but I don't think we imagined this. But we started to imagine supply chain hookups. But take me back to the before time. And when you thought about the business, what were the strategies that you thought about for growth, and where were there opportunities that you observed about Mastermind? It's gone through over the past 36 months. It's had store growth, at 69 stores from smaller growth. So you've got store growth, but did anything jump out at you immediately and said, this is where we need to grow? And then I guess where I'm going with this is, okay, now that you know what you know, and the pandemic has either been an accelerator or a catalyst, what has changed in how you're thinking about growing the business outside of the environment? Give me some, take me back to those days if you remember, if we remember the before time.
I was really excited to join Mastermind Toys, and I had started to think about, before joining, where we could go as an organization. And I was really pleased and thrilled that John had led the organization to where it is today, and I was going to now take it on its next leg of growth. And so I had started thinking about what the next iteration of Mastermind looked like. So there were definite strategies that I was looking to accelerate and to empower the team to go after. So the first, we talked a little bit about it, which was just to make sure that as many Canadian families, educators, caregivers knew about Mastermind Toys and knew about our founding principle that play is kids' work, and knew more about us and our expert eye to curating the best toys and books, and that they could count on us to find the best birthday present or the best developmental toy for each kid's age and stage. So I really wanted to amplify our brand as Canada's authority on play. The second thing that I really wanted to do was lead us on our digital reinvention. Well, we have a website and we have bricks and mortar stores. Our digital capabilities were not where they needed to be, and certainly they weren't connected or complementing the stores as best as they could. The next thing that I was focused on was, how do I take the curation, our best-in-class toy and books assortment, and bring it to more places, either digitally or in new bricks and mortar manifestations. And so that was something that I was really looking to, is there anything beyond our own stores that we can be doing?
You mean like pop-ups or something, some kind of activation outside of the 69 stores kind of thing? And you know, we should talk a little bit about, just before, because again, I know Mastermind pretty well, but the listeners may not. Your approach to your assortment is different. You know, you've touched on education, you've touched on puzzles, but I mean, walking into a Mastermind store, you know, the toy category can be crowded sometimes with retailers who do seasonal loads of mass product, but that's not really your focus. We should probably touch on that a little bit, about how you think about and how Mastermind thinks about the products that are in that store, that they think a bit differently about that, right?
Yeah, well, I would say, you know, one of the things that I wanted to maintain, Michael, was our world-class leadership on customer experience. And when I think about our customer experience, it really is because we do that curation. And so the curation is really important to us. We want to make sure that when you come into our store, you have confidence that we'll navigate to help you find the best toy or book for your need, or for your child's need, or for the gift recipient's need, because there's a lot of celebrations that happen at Mastermind. So how do we curate that? Well, we deeply know our customer, and we get to know our customer, and we also try to balance that with our knowledge on kids and kids development. So I'm sitting in my office and I'm staring at the Mastermind poster that says "Why Kids Play," and for each age and stage, we know the best toy options for body, mind, and expression. And so we really believe that that's an important foundation. We do not buy based on gender. A lot of organizations, or even influencers, are interested in the fact that Mastermind does not lean on that, and we never have. We've been spotlighted in the past for not buying for girls or buying for boys, but buying based on play patterns. And then every year we scour the world through the various toy fairs, through the various trade shows, to find those best toys and books. And we do not stop. We are in the basement of the New York Toy Fair looking for the next items. We are looking for those moments where we can engage with the person who invented this toy, and we try to get to know them. We're really curious. We want to know how the toy works. We have a creative studio in our head office called the Mastermind Playroom. We play with the toys. We get to know the toys. And we often share, even on our website, something called buyer's takes, which is what was going through our mind when we saw this product, or when we tested it for the first time. So a little bit about how we take curation seriously, and how we don't stop in our DNA to sweat that criteria or that evaluation to bring the very best of the world. And what I will say on that is, after having been in this curation business for 36 years, our vendors are now really attuned and are strategic partners in helping us with that assortment. They'll often say, you know, this is really great for Mastermind. So we've developed a reputation for what we stand for, certainly in the industry, and we're certainly leaders on the curation front, and we take that real seriously.
I want to pull on a couple of threads that you mentioned in that. One is, as you think about sourcing new and fresh product, I've been talking to a lot of retailers over the summer about how they're going to go about that. And many would tell me, how they're going to go about that in the COVID era. And many are saying, listen, maintaining relationships with existing vendors is actually in some ways been enhanced because we're in more contact, Zoom calls, I'm getting virtual tours of product. Finding new, I imagine, and I'm told, is going to be a bit different this year, right? I mean, you mentioned the toy fair, the big New York Toy Fair. I'm not sure, how fairs and buying shows are going to happen. How's your team thinking about discovering new? You just, you gave me some hints there that after 36 years, vendors know you well and kind of have a good sense of your assortment. Any thoughts on that early on about how you're thinking about 2021 and that discovery process?
Yes, certainly what I would say is I'm asking of my team to come up with new and innovative ways to discover those products. This is something that's really important to us. We often are leaders in finding those products, or at least getting first right to exclusives, because we are the ones who are the pickers of these great things. So what I would say is stay tuned, Michael. We are finding new ways to discover, because certainly we want to be the leaders in the space of finding those new toys and books. And hopefully there'll be a time when the trade shows and the fairs are back. But until then, we need to make sure that we're coming up with new ways to find those new products and to find those new vendors.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, it's less a question, I guess, and more an observation, is when I worked with the merchants when I was at the Shopping Channel, many products were seen, and again, another vehicle, today's Shopping Choices is called now, it was very heavily focused on curation, right? We're going to offer the best. And I'd put this matrix together for them, which is what's different about it and why do the customers care, right? So as when you look at product, you're probably presented lots of product that say, this is the really great, interesting thing, but you've still got, you and your merchants still have to put it through the lens of, does our customer care, right? And I guess that comes back to your knowledge of the customer and that ethos of play and understanding that age-based, right? That must be one of the touchstones for how your merchants look at this, at new product submissions, yeah?
Absolutely. And I would say during COVID, while our strategy didn't change much, only an appreciation that we needed to move faster and we were doing the right things, it was really around what categories are our parents, our caregivers, and our educators looking for. So if you think about it, how are people celebrating birthdays? How are they supplementing classroom learning? If they make the decision to homeschool their kids, what categories do they need? What are extracurriculars going to look like in the fall? And if there are not any extracurriculars, how can we have hobby-related toys and books so that we can ignite a passion or a future interest in a child? So I would say for us, this moment in time has really flexed our muscle on pivoting and deeply knowing categories and knowing our customers. A big part of Mastermind is that even in our second store, we moved from just selling educational software to now adding in toys and books. And we were deeply focused on the customer, but we were deeply focused on co-creating together. So we talk to our employees, we talk to our customers, and we're constantly asking for feedback. And that's how we came up with our gift wrap. Parents were busy on the go, heading to a birthday party, and after they picked the gift, they wanted the wrapping paper. But the wrapping paper has now also come to symbolize that the curation has happened at Mastermind. And so we know that kids get excited when they see either our holiday wrap or our iconic dots wrap, because they know it has the Mastermind stamp of approval. And gift givers feel really great about it because they know that Mastermind has done all the heavy lifting to curate the best toy and book for that child. And and our associates in the store have taken the time to ask the right curiosity questions to help find that gift when you're in the store. So not only do we believe in the curation, we try to signal the curation, and what it means to customers, we've learned over time, is it creates that excitement and it creates that stamp of approval that Mastermind is known for.
Through all kinds of different touch points.
That's right.
Let's go back a little bit to the store. Let's talk about the store for a bit. So take me back 12 weeks, 13 weeks ago when the pandemic was in full force. What were your first thoughts and what was you doing with the team to react to the crisis in the store? Like what was your approach? Did you change how you designed the stores? Did you make any changes to the stores? And some of which I'd imagine my kind of follow-up question is we think in the years ahead of the COVID era, anything you can think of in ways that you operate the stores that at the early days was different, and then that might be a lasting change in your minds about how those stores look and feel. I mean, certainly it's less hands-on, I'd imagine, for example, from a kid's perspective. But to walk me through that first, okay, what do we do? How do we keep our people safe, and how do we keep our customers safe?
Yeah, so it was a really tricky time in the sense that there was new information every day, and that the information was sometimes different by geography or province. And so my first instinct, or how I woke up every day, was asking myself, what decisions do I need to make today? And I would rally the team every morning to say, what is the new information, but what decisions do I need to make today? There was so much information. There was so much uncertainty. So one of my instincts was to lean on our purpose. So our purpose at Mastermind is why kids play, or play as kids work. And so as I thought about that, I thought for our employees and for our customers, I'm inviting kids, women, parents, grandparents, sometimes expectant women, mothers into my store. And I need to be thinking about their safety. And so we actually closed our stores well before the government mandated us to, because I felt like I needed to make some courageous decisions, and that I needed to make decisions that were consistent with our values, which is that employee experience above all else drives customer experience. And I need to keep my employees safe. And second, because we are a kids' toy store, and yes, we do have kids at heart that join us, we needed to lead the way to keep our customers and our employees safe. So that was my first instinct, was to make sure that I was making the decisions based on our values and consistent with who we are as an organization. The second piece, which I've already talked a little bit about, was my first instinct was to deeply understand the customer's problems, right? So what is the customer going through at this time? So, parents are now isolated at home with kids. What do they need Mastermind for? Well, they need Mastermind to help them engage. And what they need to be doing to supplement or enhance the learning that may or may not be happening at school or with remote learning. And so we launched Story Time. We launched something on our social channels where for 20 minutes, our book buyer would read some books. And we heard from parents, you're giving me my morning coffee back. Our social media followership tripled. And we also recognized that parents weren't celebrating birthdays. And so we launched a virtual birthday party with, Lego master builders, expert parenting experts on arts and crafts. And we tried to do this because we knew that parents would look to us. And so that whole part of our DNA where we're deeply customer obsessed was something that I encouraged the team not to lose during this time. And then the third thing I would say is that we took advantage of this time to innovate. As I said, play and toys was having a moment, or a spotlight was put on education and learning. And so I said to my team, let's be bold and scrappy, which is my way of saying, let's fail and fail fast. And so, pre-COVID era, Michael, we didn't have curbside. So we launched curbside. Curbside knowing that it would remain sticky. We also, to your point around pop-ups, during COVID, we launched a digital pop-up, the first brand ever to launch a digital branded pop-up shop on Loblaw Marketplace. Because we knew that parents were looking for those items, not only to entertain their kids, but to enrich their kids' lives. As I mentioned, we tripled our social media followership and really leaned into a content and perspective, and not just toys, but why play is important to development. And we reinvented our customer service group. We assisted 5 times the volume of customers that typical during this time, as we knew that a lot of people were joining us and shopping in new and different ways, whether it was curbside, online. Eventually, we launched more, click and collect type things. And so we really needed to help our customers navigate and let them choose their own adventure and come to us in the most comfortable way that they wanted to. And then we also had to, over time, welcome our customers back. So you said, what has changed about your stores? Well, when we reopened our stores by province, and as we speak today, all of our stores have reopened, but it wasn't, all of our stores shut down on the same day. We reopened on different days depending on the geography, right? And so one of the things we had to really think about was, what is the new store experience? So you said, what has changed in that? Well, we had to remove a lot of our demos from the floor. We had to stop our events. But what we did think about was, what is this experience going to be like when people come back into our store? And so we thought we had an opportunity to actually make the shopping experience, if kids wanted to come back with their parents, and that's their decision, we would want to welcome our littlest customers in a way where they could understand what social distancing means. So we actually created new signage for our store that helps our littlest customers understand what social distancing means. Let me give you an example. So we showed our customers that they needed to stay 6 feet apart by saying it's 3 scooter lengths.
That's fun.
We put floor decals on the floor that had little shoe prints that said, so that people know how to stay 6 feet apart, especially when they're checking out. And we said, dancing on the spot encouraged. So we really took this opportunity to relook at the stores, not only from the eyes of our customers who were coming in with more knowledge, but also our littlest customers, and really celebrating the fact that they're not digesting the information in the same way, and they're not able to fully grasp social distancing. And we, as the toy store, have a role to play in helping parents educate their kids on that. So we took that signage pretty seriously.
I did an interview with, very innovative. I love that idea, dancing encouraged on the spot. I did an interview with Dan Pink, best-selling author, and he does a lot of work in organizations. And I asked him how and where lessons are being learned in organizations around the speed of movement. And I think this is one of these catalyst things that COVID has brought on. Now, you weren't even 90 days into the new role when Catalyst hit, so I guess it's a bit of a different question for you. But what he told me is he talked to senior executives who actually had someone in the organization write down all the great things they were doing that they hadn't been doing before to suddenly make fast decisions. I mean, when I talk to a lot of CEOs, one of their concerns, free-floating anxiety type concerns, is we don't move fast enough as an organization. And yet you've now seen in the COVID era organizations making decisions that would take years taking days. And is there anything that struck you about the organization? I mean, again, a little bit of a strange question because you hadn't even been there 90 days, that you suddenly went from making decisions at one pace to another. Is there anything you wanted to make sure that you continue to do that you learned from an organizational perspective during those fast-moving COVID decision days, the daily meetings you described?
Yeah, the one thing I would point out is I've really appreciated the shift in mindset of the Mastermind team. This opportunity or this time has allowed us to challenge every perceived barrier, reasons why we might have said no in the past. So in addition to saying, what decision do I need to make today? I also woke up every morning saying, how can I find more ways to say yes? And I hope this attitude and this behavior continues. And to your point around celebrating or writing down all the decisions that people are making during this time, we are doing town halls every 2 weeks by Zoom, organization-wide, and we always start off by celebrating the wins. Because I believe we're really creating some momentum as an organization, and we are making those fast decisions. But Michael, we're making thoughtful decisions too, and some of them are really working. And so I'm really trying to take the time to spotlight them. We've launched a program called Mastermind Moments, where we amplify these wins, because I don't want to lose, as you said, pace. Right. I don't want to lose this pace. I really want to keep the mindset of, we can do more, and the past barriers or the past silos that would have existed have now been broken down, and we've come together as a team, and I really don't want to lose that going forward.
What an interesting moment. All right, so last question. The biggest sales period of the category is ahead. Yes. Toys is a Q4 category, which I guess was in an odd way, a bit of a blessing for the toy category. COVID's biggest impact was in a fairly light sales season. Anything you're seeing? What can we expect? What are your thoughts on the Q4? Any product trends? Anything jump out at you that you're excited about or that you're thinking about particularly? I've talked to retailers who are loving curbside, and I've described it as a safety valve. You can't fit the number of people in the store you did last year. Right. There's constraints on delivery because the delivery systems are pretty jammed today. It's going to get worse, not better. So what are you thinking for Q4? Like, it's a big time, big important time for you. And from all those dimensions, products, categories, anything. What are you thinking for Q4?
All right, well, let's cover all of them. So from a product standpoint, one of the things that we're seeing that's really exciting is that Lego's launch in August of Super Mario. And so it's Lego meets the Super Mario video game. And it launched August 1st. And the early read, Michael, is that this is going to be a hit for the holidays. So from a product perspective, certainly thinking that there's going to be some winners like that, as well as Spin Master with their Paw Patrol have come out with a dino version of all the pups. And so that's looking exciting as well. And then today we just launched on our Instagram pages the Hatchimal Crystal Flyer, which is a throwback. The Crystal Flyer, this is its second iteration from decades ago, and it's coming back, and it's really looking like an item that will excite our littlest customers. So those are kind of three from a product standpoint. From a category standpoint, we are really leaning in on this notion of play is good for kids of all ages. And so this whole kids at heart and family bonding is a category that we think is going to stick. So puzzles and games will remain hot, especially over the holidays, where maybe as a family, we're going to be spending more time together. I know a lot of friends and family members have said that this time period has really given them an opportunity to spend more time with their family, and they're liking that. So from that standpoint, that category we believe is going to continue. And then the category of outdoor play, especially for the fall and back to school, we do believe that the next version of, say, the scooter or the sidewalk chalk is certainly going to come for fourth quarter. And then one other category is certainly the deep learning and the STEM related products. We know that extracurriculars are going to look different. We know that through extracurriculars, kids form a passion or an interest. And so arts and craft kits or STEM related products, we believe we are going to see an increase in those as people shift their after school hours and routines. And then finally, for the holidays, in the past couple of years, the holiday timeframe or that rush of shopping adventure was getting pushed deeper and deeper into December. We actually are thinking there's going to be a bit of a holiday head start. We have our iconic wrapping paper, which is our dots, but we also have a holiday version. And we're seeing some customers already asking for some of those gifts to be wrapped. And so we think there's going to be a bit of a holiday head start that we're going to lean into.
Shop early, shop often.
Yeah, shop Mastermind Toys.
Love it. Well, listen, speaking of which, how can people learn, where do they go to learn more about Mastermind and a little bit more about yourself?
Sure.
LinkedIn, I suppose. You're on LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn. Mastermind's on LinkedIn. I mean, the best way to experience us is either in our wonder-filled stores or our website. So 69 stores coast to coast, as well as our website. So you can visit us there at mastermindtoys.com. And then all of our social channels have the same label, Mastermind Toys. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Pinterest. You can see some great Pinterest board ideas there. And always you can reach out to Mastermind through a variety of channels. And for myself, I'm on LinkedIn and happy to connect with anyone who's interested in Mastermind Toys.
Well, Sarah, this has been a great conversation. Given you've been drinking from a fire hose, so to speak, since pretty much your feet landed at Mastermind, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's great deep dive into it. So really appreciate you taking time to speak with the voice of retail. And I wish you much continued success and success for Q4 and beyond.
Thanks, Michael. It's been great having the conversation with you.
Jason, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm doing terrific. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Well, I feel like I know you, but I don't, because whether it's podcasting or whether I see you on conferences, you were on Commerce Next, and you did all kinds of great stuff. And I've seen you in the industry for decades. It's kind of actually surprising you and I don't think we've met in person. So it's really fabulous to have the opportunity to chat with you today. Why don't we start out? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal, professional journey, all about your podcast, fellow podcaster, and what you do today at Publicis.
Yeah. So as you alluded, I'm the Chief Commerce Strategy Officer at Publicis. Clearly, I got to make that title up myself. My podcast co-host, Scott, likes to tease me that he thinks I get paid by the word. So he thinks I tried to put as many words in there as possible, which is not true, but it's aspirational. And I've just been a long-time retailer. I'm a fourth-generation retailer. I started my career at what is now a joke, but I get defensive about it. Some family members sold some independent video stores to an entrepreneur that started a company called Blockbuster Video.
Yeah,
so I grew up in the marketing department at Blockbuster.
Are you listening to that Land of the Giants podcast series?
I am. I'm a little bit behind, but yes. Yes, and I've been refuting points behind the scenes. I work in an agency environment, and every deck I've ever seen has a slide with a logo of Blockbuster talking about not getting Netflixed. And I like to point out that we started a business. We sold it in 1994 for $9 billion to Viacom before Netflix ever existed, and got out. And by modern standards, that would be $15 billion today. It took Netflix about 20 years to get to $15 billion in value. So just pointing out, we started a successful company, grew it very fast, and sold it.
I actually was hired I worked at Hudson's Bay, and they got a new CEO who was ex-Walmart and ex-Blockbuster. What was his name? Bill Fields.
Bill Fields, yeah.
So Bill Fields actually hired me at Hudson's Bay back in the late 90s because he had just came out of Blockbuster. I think the series is actually very, I would say, fair. I think unfairly, Blockbuster gets this poster child of Lost in Time and a bunch of other things. But as you say, that it was really a successful business, and it's a great series. Anyways,
the show is awesome, and the criticism of Blockbuster is fair. I just like to point out, it wasn't the founders that missed Netflix. It was subsequent, the third generation of business owners, and certainly they did miss an opportunity. But it's I like to point out that the Rockefellers did pretty well on the railroads, but you wouldn't want to invest in a railroad today.
Yeah, the Canadian example is the Eaton's department store, where by the time they got to third or fourth generation, they kind of lost the script, and that didn't go so well for them. But okay, so you're at this big international Publicis. You've got experience in. How did you wind up at Publicis? Like, what's the track for me?
So Publicis is a big holding company that owns 230 something agencies. One of those agencies is a digital agency called Razorfish. So I worked for a number of retailers. I worked at Target and Best Buy, and started a small consulting firm that got acquired by a medium-sized consulting firm, and eventually transitioned to Razorfish. Razorfish was owned by Microsoft, actually, and got acquired by Publicis. And so I kind of, if you're familiar with the Peter Principle, I've enjoyed a number of promotions at Publicis until I've achieved my level of incompetency.
Well, I'm not sure I'll go along with the incompetence part. Why don't we, you've got such a wide-ranging perspective, I'm sure. And I was thinking, how do I start this conversation? And I thought it would be interesting for the audience, for my listeners, to take them on a brief history of time from an e-commerce platform perspective. I mean, you and I've been in e-commerce for a long time, from the build it yourself with IBM WebSphere to Blue Martini to all these different platforms. And we would off mic, we were talking about the impacts of the pandemic and the closeness it is to a zombie apocalypse. So it got me thinking about headless commerce, whatever that is. I'm not clear. Could you just walk us through from your perspective, so unique, this kind of history of time, where we are now with platforms, and what's this headless commerce all about? And should retailers be paying attention to that more than they do today?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, the history, you can get as rich as you want. Like we started e-commerce at Blockbuster in '94. So back then, there were no software tools. If you needed to build a website, you were doing it yourself. If you were building an e-commerce site, you were certainly going to have to build it yourself. Shortly thereafter, Amazon launched. There became more pent-up demand, and the first generation of shrink-wrap software that you could run on your own servers, on your own premises, what we would call on-prem software, to host e-commerce sites. And so you mentioned Blue Martini was a very early one. There was a sporting good company that was called something Sports Incorporated that were early into the e-commerce space, and they eventually started selling their software to others. They renamed themselves GSI and later became GSI Commerce. Mm-hmm. And over time, these three huge enterprise platforms emerged. One that was owned by IBM called WebSphere, one that got acquired by Oracle called ATG, and then later a German company called Hybris that was acquired by SAP. So until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if you wanted to sell $1 billion a year US online, you likely were either built something yourself or you were using one of those three platforms. And then there were a lot of other platforms that were slightly I don't want to say lower in, because they may have been better in almost all regards, but weren't as successful at that scale. So those were things like Demandware and a whole host of companies, Teamsite. Yeah,
they weren't thought of as, what would I say, like enterprise grade, that $1 billion.
The big three would use the derogatory term that they're not enterprise. And so in essence, a variety of trends have mostly caused the demise of all those platforms. So first of all, if you go look at the top 100 sites in the U.S., the overwhelming majority built their technology in-house. They may have bought some kind of starter platform, some set of APIs or building blocks, but the dirty secret is the majority of sites are in-house. That's not necessarily a good practice for a lot of those retailers. There's a lot of problems with that. Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it is like 20 plus years in that you can't just go out and buy yourself well, maybe you can now, we'll get to that, but yeah. Why do you think that is? I remember this great analogy when we were talking about different platforms and the way things checked out. I was talking to Phil Terry from Creative Good, and he says, imagine if you got in a rental car and the gas pedal and brake moved every time you got in a different rental car. Like there's some common elements that need to be there. You would think it would have moved a little farther than that. The commonality of, ship to store and home.
Yeah. Well, I think early in the evolution, the level of detail you have to pay to pay attention to differentiate a product is wildly different, right? So if you were buying one of the first automobiles, you probably cared a lot about like who designed the engine and how the engine worked and what did it have a catalytic converter or not? And what kind of tires did it have? As cars got better and better, shoppers today rarely, even know how many cylinders are in their car. Right. Because, and so they start paying attention to higher level conveniences. And I feel like the same is somewhat true of platforms, that early on you had to worry, like, could I get PCI compliance, which is a security, requirement to take credit cards, like with a platform, right? Not every platform guaranteed it could. Is it going to have a successful search? Is there going to be too much friction in checkout? If I feel like my experience needs to be different from my competitors, like, is there the flexibility to even change the user experience in the ways I want? I have a notion that my way of doing catalog pages is better than everyone else. Can I implement that, right? And so you had all those kinds of concerns, and the decisions were often made not by business users, but by IT users that were going to host the platform. And so they tended to care a lot more about what language the platform was written in than they did the user experience it delivered, right? And so a lot of these platforms grew up in that criteria, where their primary stakeholder was an IT person, and where they could kind of compete on these fundamental best practices, like, did you have this built-in feature or not? And as they've all gotten better, and a lot of those hypotheses that people had about what experiences work better than others have been like sort of well proven. There's less differentiation. That, like, for a lot of my career, the way you'd pick a platform is you'd write some RFP and you'd say, here are the 5,000 requirements we have, IBM, Oracle, and SAP. How many of these requirements do you meet? And stupidly, they would all like go through 5,000 things and check 4,900 of them and say, we don't have these 100. And then you'd pick which 100 you are willing to live without. Like today, there's 30 platforms that would just check all 5,000.
Right.
Because they're essentially, supporting all those features is easy and well known, and there's plenty of example code to use to build them. And the platforms today are more building blocks than they are a turnkey store. And so you can kind of implement any of those features with any vendor set of Legos, if you will. And so those differentiations become less. And, some of the platforms that catered to the long tail, and most famously a Canadian company, Shopify, they basically give you everything you need in a way that you don't have to think about them. And they've taken a lot of the technical nuance out of picking a platform.
In some ways, they've reduced the friction of choice and leveled the playing field for many sized businesses, right? You can have functionality as if you're a $1 billion company.
There are still legacy companies that would, say, well, but gosh, they're great for the long tail, but they still aren't enterprise and still can't scale, which is a dubious claim. From a business standpoint, Shopify wasn't born to cater to very large companies. And so, like, frankly, the business services and the sales amenities you might get are probably not what you're used to. But from a feature standpoint, like, you're probably fine. And then on top of that,
and of course they would say they're Shopify Plus. I'm more than familiar with Shopify.
Yeah.
As a great Canadian, one of the great 3 Canadian unicorns. We had BlackBerry and Northern Telecom happens to it, but their Shopify Plus platform and organization has kind of risen to that challenge. It hosts some pretty major Staples Canada, for example. I interviewed the chief digital officer of Staples Canada. They're on Shopify Plus platform.
Yeah. And the devil is in the details. Like, there are absolutely some bigger sites than those legacy enterprise companies would care to admit that are very successfully running on Shopify. And frankly, the retailers that pick Shopify like paid way less and dramatically de-risked their implementation. Like, the legacy enterprise software, like something like 50% of the implementations worked. So, it wasn't a pretty situation, and Shopify and its competitors, frankly, are wildly better in a lot of ways. There are still some edge cases that, someone could argue are harder to perfectly implement in Shopify. And like most modern platforms, Shopify sort of has two choices. They have a turnkey store, and they have a set of APIs that you can use to build your own experience on. And so increasingly they're using that API model in Shopify Plus to move up market. But we could have an intelligent debate about when it is or isn't appropriate to use Shopify, but regardless, I feel like they've changed the landscape and they've changed the calculus for everyone. They've dramatically raised the bar, and I chuckle. I'll have clients that are on one of these legacy platforms, and they might pay $1 million a year in maintenance on the software they already own. And so then, the CEO goes, I want to launch a personal e-commerce site, and I want 20 products on it, and I want it in 2 weeks. And so then they're going to want, you can't possibly do that on one of these legacy platforms. So they're going to launch it on Shopify, and they're probably going to use the CFO's credit card to launch it. And then a month later, that IBM salesperson, now an HCL salesperson, because IBM sold their business, is going to show up and tell you why he's raising his rates on the $1 million in software maintenance. And that CFO is going to say, I launched an equivalent site on my credit card last week. And it's an unpleasant conversation.
You remember the days where the old saying, choosing someone like IBM is nobody ever lost their job for choosing, I guess in our context, the three big ones, right? You wouldn't get fired for picking one of those three big ones, and it would be a risk to pick anything else. Like increasing in the rest of our conversation, that's increasingly into a side note. In fairness, Websphere Commerce was a Canadian company. So they were acquired by IBM, but all the development for Websphere was in Markham, which is a northern suburb of Toronto. That's right, just north of where I am today. How does all this fit into this headless commerce? Like, is this just a new buzzword? Tell me about that. I've had a couple of retailers ask me, what is headless commerce? And I've struggled a bit to kind of conceptualize it clearly. Yeah, so I would say there's three big evolutions happening in parallel. Like increasingly, you do not want the software running on a server under your desk. And when I say under your desk, I'm being cute. Like you don't want to own the servers that the software is running on, right? So you want the software in the cloud. And so, originally the enterprise cloud solution was Demandware. Things like Shopify are natively in the cloud. While the overwhelming majority of retail still isn't in the cloud for e-commerce, certainly nobody's doing anything new that isn't in the cloud. At the same time, there's this notion around separating your user experience from your fundamental commerce services. So do you really need to get your merchandising capability and the design of your product detail page from the same company that provides your credit card authorization software? And increasingly, the answer is no. You'd like more flexibility on that user experience, and you like business users and creative people to be able to change that, while the IT people make sure that the credit card service isn't being interrupted in any way. And so when we talk about decoupling the user experience from all the commerce services, that's really my definition of headless. There's a number of vendors have each tried to own that term, and they would draw distinctions between each other and try to redefine headless. And to my knowledge, there's not a industry standard definition, but mostly it means decoupling the user experience from the platform services. And so what that would let you do is use a CMS system as your front end if you wanted. And even in the dark ages, really wealthy companies might buy IBM Websphere Commerce and buy Adobe Experience Manager and smash the two together, which was a horrifically expensive Frankenstein that ran on some very big sites. That's really what headless is. And there were some early vendors, folks like Elastipath and others that sort of focused on that. And then there's this third trend. This is even a more controversial term, but we'll call it microservices or service-based or API-based. And the notion behind this is, hey, maybe you don't even need all your fundamental services from the same vendor. Like maybe instead of buying software, you could rent
services with an API front end that you could think of as sort of technical Legos that you could pick the best of breed from multiple vendors and snap them together to make your platform. And a vendor might offer a complete set of APIs that's everything you need for e-commerce, or they might, specialize just in search or specialize just in personalization or various things. And so in some ways you can get to headless by just using APIs or microservices. And so those two terms get blended together a little bit. But today, you'll hear a lot about like, oh gosh, we want a service-based headless cloud native solution.
You fill out a bingo card for that one.
Exactly. It can be a drinking game.
Well, this is great. That's very helpful. Let's talk about some other stuff about e-commerce. Now, this great concept of this great acceleration that COVID has wrought on e-commerce. I was watching one of your presentations. You're just talking about some numbers in the U.S. From, I think it was the month of June, with like double-digit 22% increase for big sites like Amazon. So there's clearly been a big move to e-commerce that happened that way in Canada. Stores were closed. We leapt forward years. The question on many retailers' minds is it going to stick? I mean, if the waterline raised up so high, will it go back down? Or the other school of thought is so many people are experiencing e-commerce that either didn't before or were light users that this acceleration is going to stick. Are you seeing any evidence that points you in either direction?
Yeah, there are, but there are probably conflicting forces working on both sides of that, right? And so you almost have to kind of measure the opposing forces to figure out what's going to win. And the first thing I'd say is the answer is going to be vary depending on the category you're in, right? So if we go back in the time machine to pre-COVID, so in North America, we'll call that February, there were some categories that had been wildly disrupted by digital. If we talked about Blockbuster at the beginning, if you're in the video business, your digital disruption is way in your rearview mirror, right? Like not a lot of people are selling plastic circles in stores anymore. If you were in the grocery business, like for all intents and purposes, your business really hadn't been disrupted by digital. Less than 3% of all grocery sales in North America were online, and more than half of the North American population had never tried ordering groceries online. So your penetration was very low. So then when you apply the COVID pressure to everything, yes, categories that were pretty heavily disrupted by digital got even better digital penetration. So consumer electronics or apparel or homewares, all got some digital acceleration. But the categories that weren't digital at all got the most acceleration. So grocery got jumped from 3% to 12% penetration. So
huge on a huge category like that.
Yeah,
we're not talking
and
about
it's the biggest chunk of consumer spending. It's like 60% of discretionary spending. So it's by far the biggest prize out there. And then throw in the fact that Amazon hasn't won that space and isn't particularly good at it yet. And it is their weakest point. I described when they bought Whole Foods as catching a falling knife. Because it was really just the troublesome category to begin with, the troublesome challenge, and they really haven't been successful at it. I mean, no, in the long run, I always hesitate to bet against them because they have a pretty good track record. But yeah, absolutely. So that is the biggest prize that's out there is digital grocery, but very unlikely that it stays at 12% penetration, right? Like as stores open up and people feel more comfortable shopping, some of that's going to fall back. And there are some factors that are going to help push some of that back, right? Like a lot of the digital experiences people got stunk, frankly, right? And so, so we had holiday level volumes in March and April that were totally unanticipated and no one prepared for. And so a lot of websites fell down, the delivery windows for your groceries and things were super long. And so, there are a lot of first-time triers of grocery, and everything they ordered got canceled or substituted, and it showed up at a different time, and that experience may not stick because of that. Or Amazon turned back their service levels and delivered things slower, and had longer lead times and things like that. So some of this digital adoption was out of necessity. The experience wasn't the best, and so some of it may not stick and it'll fall back. And then just don't have enough capacity for all of this digital to stick. So, at first people were really excited, like, oh man, our stores are closed, but everyone's trying to order those shoes they used to buy in the store from us online. We're going to maybe be okay. And then the UPS sales guy came up and said, yeah, we can't deliver all those shoes you're trying to ship. And we're going to have to charge you surcharges, and we're not going to go to your store and pick up those shoes.
Well, and to continue that thought, it'll be such an interesting Black Friday, Cyber Monday holiday, because you combine limits on store capacity and that are necessary to keep the employees and customers safe with the limits that are on both sides of the border. Canada's not in a great place either in terms of delivery capacity. It'll be a very interesting, holiday, because how do you drive excitement, or how do you spread excitement out? Amazingly, Prime Day never happened yet. I've heard rumors that it could happen September, October, but it's just an indication of what you're saying, right? It's the real terrestrial.
So some of that digital is going to be lost because we can't elastically. We figured out how to elastically grow the server capacity, but we can't elastically grow the fulfillment capacity, even Amazon. And so, I think a lot of that digital, when you net it all out, a lot of that digital will stick, but not all of it. So, if you went from 17% of all North American sales were e-commerce to 33%, like, you're probably going to fall back down to 25, and groceries probably going to fall from 12 back to 6 or 7. But those are still enormous shifts that fundamentally disrupt those industries.
Let's talk about mobile. You and I would both know, and you'd probably have at your fingertips, so to speak, the actual data, but e-commerce on mobile devices converts less than desktop. That's a bit of a truism. And my question to you, is that a feature? In other words, will that always be the case, or is it a bug? Is there a solution for solving for so much volume moving onto mobile, yet the conversion is just fundamentally lower than transactions from a transactional perspective on a desktop? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do think it's a bug. I don't think it'll be a permanent feature. And my hypothesis is, if we look across the world, that I call that delta between all the traffic moving to mobile devices, but the conversion still being much worse on mobile devices than desktop devices. I call that the mobile gap. And so if you look at that mobile gap, it's very pronounced in North America, on the order of 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. There's no mobile gap in China. And if you look at the markets that don't have a mobile gap, and you look at the markets that have a prominent mobile gap, and the distinctive feature is that the markets with no mobile gap have ubiquitous digital wallets. So everyone has stored payment information. It's universally used. In North America, less than half of all transactions happen with a digital wallet. And so I like to remind people, that buying something on your mobile phone requires 3 hands: one to hold the phone, one to tap the screen, and one to hold your credit card. And the majority of North American consumers do not have 3 hands. Mobile experiences.
Well, the pandemic isn't over yet. We haven't seen all the results of COVID yet.
Fair enough. I don't know if I'm hoping for that or not, but yeah. So as digital wallets become more popular and more ubiquitous, like if you look at cohorts, like Apple Pay users is a very small cohort of active monthly users, but their conversion rate is way better. And even PayPal users or Amazon Pay users have much better conversion rates than the general population. So I think a big part of it's digital wallets. There's a bunch of reasons digital wallets have been slower to be adopted in North America. Some of those are being mildly impacted by COVID, so maybe it helps a little, but we'll see. I do feel like there are solutions that are continuing to gain traction there. And the other big problem is speed. The mobile networks suck, and the way we build mobile websites is highly optimized against speed and performance. And so, unfortunately, we now know that. We now know better technologies for building mobile sites that perform much better, but the overwhelming majority of the e-commerce industry has huge sunk costs in responsive design websites, which is not very performance oriented. So you're starting to see the top 10 or 15% of e-commerce sites migrate off of responsive design to these newer development paradigms that allow for much better performance on mobile networks, and that tends to dramatically increase lift. So if you look at the cohort of people that have progressive web-based architectures and are digital wallet owning users, there really is no mobile gap. So that's kind of my hypothesis.
Okay, last couple of questions. So you spend your days advising people, C-level executives, on what to do and some strategies and opening opportunities for them. Let's say, given your great depth of experience and your fabulous podcast, some VC with incredibly deep pockets says, all right, show me what you got. I'm going to give you unlimited funds to open up a retail store. What would you do? What category what would you do?
My tongue-in-cheek answer is I would not take their money. Retail is a really hard business. There's a lot of headwinds at the moment. So the first thing I'd say is, like, if you're really being honest with yourself and looking for the best return on capital, like, I'm not sure you would pick a lot of retail categories right now. But more seriously, I actually think the VC model is not my favorite way to fund a new venture. And there's a lot of endemic problems. When you take that VC money, that VC ultimately expects some huge exit, which means you have to build a company that's worth several $1 billion. And there's a ton of exciting new companies we've seen in the space that grow to be hundreds of millions of dollars in sales and employ people and make customers super happy and would be perfectly viable businesses, except for the fact that they can't get the return that the VCs want. So my digressing from the answer you were expecting, I'd rather self-fund the business or find some angel investors or do something different than the traditional funding. But that aside, in my view, retail's getting very bifurcated. Like there's going to be a few very successful retailers in every market that are everything stores that compete on price and assortment and lack of friction. And so that is the Amazons or Walmarts of the world or the Alibabas of the world. And I think it's a losing game to try to compete with them at this point. I certainly wouldn't get in one of those spaces. And then the other side of retail are curated specialty retailers that increasingly sell products that they invent themselves. So they're vertically integrated in particular niches, and they almost always bundle services with products. And I still think there's a ton of opportunity for well-executed specialty retailers that take those latest learnings in mind. So if I were going to start a business, I would probably play on that side of the fence. Despite the fact that grocery is a huge opportunity, the margins are extremely low. Nobody's figured out how to sell groceries profitably online yet. I believe we will, but I'm not sure I'd want to be the one competing in that space. I certainly would stay out of the apparel space because it's a disaster right now. So I would probably think about something sneaky like starting a retail store that helped people do home Zoom offices or something. Like,
pets is a good category too. Pet is good. Pet is another one of those ones where the unit economics are tricky. Like it's kind of a bummer to sell inexpensive cat litter in 40-pound bags and ship it. But right.
But Chewy's one of the few startups that had sort of scaled above that $1 billion threshold. And until COVID, they weren't profitable. But COVID really accelerated them and helped their unit economics quite a bit.
All right, last question for you. Thanks for that. 3 top tips for retailers who are just now, Canada's a little bit behind, so to speak, but there are some everywhere who are just kind of finding the religion of e-commerce or are saying, listen, we got to pull this thing out of the closet and get really serious about it, really serious about ramping up their efforts. What are the 3 most important things you would say to someone and saying, listen, I'm now serious about e-commerce. I was kind of okay about it before. What are the 3 things you'd tell them to do?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, you need to think about your success criteria and what your KPIs are. And the reason I say that is if you start an e-commerce business and you call it store 999 and it competes with your stores and you just think of it as a different distribution channel with a separate financial model, you're sort of missing the point. Like the overwhelming majority of customers are going to shop across multiple channels, and you need to understand how those digital touch points are influencing in-store sales and vice versa, right? And so you really need, this is kind of cliche, but you need an omni-channel attribution model to sort of understand how all these activities are helping. And you certainly need to be thinking about customer lifetime value, not individual conversion events. And so I would start by sort of defining what success looks like. And then, second, you then need to organize yourself. And I mean that literally, like organize your teams against those KPIs. So if you're optimizing for a customer lifetime value, you wouldn't have a separate digital merchandising team and a separate brick and mortar merchandising team, and you wouldn't have separate teams that are each trying to get merchandising funds from the same vendors and all these sorts of things. So you need to build a rational organization that's organized against those KPIs. And then, the third thing that's really becoming a pain point as kind of retailers go from e-commerce being a novelty to a core part of the business is you really need to focus on the unit economics and making sure that you have a fundamentally profitable business model, right? Like when e-commerce is 3% of your sales, you can kind of say, hey, I don't care if it makes money or not. I'm just trying to learn how to do it. But when it's 10 or 15% of your sales, you can't afford for that not to be profitable. And so that means if you're in grocery, you need to be investing in making major capital investments in automated picking, and you need to be enticing customers to come to your store for curbside pickup instead of home delivery, which is usually not favorable for unit economics. You need to be thinking about things like that.
Tell me about how people can get in touch and learn more and learn more about you and find your podcast and all that great stuff.
Yeah, well, the good news is I'm wildly overexposed. So if you just type retail geek into one word into any sort of search engine, you're likely going to find me. I spend too much time on Twitter, so that's kind of my most popular social media network. You can certainly follow me on LinkedIn. I try to share a lot of good content there. And then, as you alluded to, a much smarter co-host, Scott Wingo, and I started a podcast over 3 years ago. So they're in the highly unlikely event you didn't get a adequate dose of me just now. There's 230 more hours of me on the internet. So you can search in iTunes. If you just type e-commerce into iTunes, Scott and I's scary picture will pop up. But the actual podcast is called The Jason and Scot Show. And Scott's parents were very bad at SEO, so they misspelled his name. It's actually SCOT with one T.
Well, listen, congratulations on that. That's a fantastic milestone. Being a fellow podcaster, it's really great to see that success. Whenever I type in retail and try to do some searching, you come up for sure. And fortunately, sometimes we come up beside each other, so it's great to be in great company. Jason, thanks so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail. Really appreciate your time and insights, and I wish you a safe and continued week for you and your family.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a real pleasure, and everyone, please be safe and well.
Well, thanks to Sarah and Jason for being my guests, and to Astound Commerce for the support in this episode. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of LeBlanc Company Inc. You can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.